This week in the Regency, it's the fifth week of the month, and so I went looking for something interesting. I thought it might be interesting to look for Rundell and Bridges. If you've read Georgette Hay, you know that Rundell and Bridges is a very high-class jeweler and turns up in quite a few stories. Um, and indeed was the jeweler was a royal jeweler. In 1797, they were appointed jeweler to the king, and the Prince Regent kept up that relationship all the way through to his death, really. And indeed, we could say that Rundell and Bridges were one of the reasons that Pretty was always in debt, because he acquired an enormous amount of gold and silver and jewels from them over his lifetime. So I thought, well, Rundell and Bridges would be interesting. I'll go look for that. And I randomly picked a year, 1817. And lo and behold, it was a jewel heist week at Rundell and Bridges. So here is what the shop looks like now. You can see it's in quite a nice part of the town still. It's in Ludgate Hill, which is inside the City of London, the old medieval city of London. And those arches would have been plate glass windows we are told by contemporary sources like Ackerman's repository, had really enticing displays on them. And they would have gone in through that little wooden door on the left of the screen. So here we go, the jewel heist, extraordinary robbery. In the morning of Tuesday se'nnight, that's a week, a person who had the appearance of a foreigner and who called himself Mr. Simon Blaum called at the house of Messrs. Rundell, Bridge and Rundell. Right, I'm going to stop here and go, who are Rundell, Bridge and Rundell? Rundell and Bridge were the people who first established the firm, and that was Phillip Rundell and John Bridge. Now, they were called, colloquially, Oil and Vinegar. Phillip Rundell came from an acting family. Several of his siblings were quite well-known actors, and he brought those talents to being a salesman. He was a perfect courtier, always very attentive, very polite, very wonderful towards his clients, whereas Bridge was not. He was accorded one of the great diamond experts in England, which is relevant later. And he was quite acerbic and a bit of a taskmaster, apparently, to the people who worked for him. The second Rundell was the son of the first Rundell. So I love the concept of oil and vinegar. Anyway, the Rundell, Bridge and Rundell, the eminent jewelers on Ludgate Hill, for the purpose, as be pretended, of purchasing a large quantity of diamonds. So presumably John Bridge was involved with this as well as Rundell. He wore gold earrings, so he must have been a foreigner, spoke French with rather a German accent, and gave his address at Coffee House in Leicester Square. That's quite fashionable. He was accompanied by a man whom he called his interpreter. He did not profess that he should pay for the diamonds at that moment, but said that he would select a parcel, leave them in the hands of Messrs. Rundell and Bridge, and would call in about a week to take them away and pay for them. With great deliberation, these swindlers looked out diamonds to the amount of more than £20,000. Now, if we remember Pride and Prejudice, people were treating Darcy like a billionaire because he had an income of £10,000 a year. So £20,000, we're talking about a huge amount of money. More than £20,000, which they desired might be put into a paper box which they had brought with them, and one of them sealed it with a cipher SB. Okay, so the reason they would have done this is to say, we have picked these particular diamonds. We don't want you to swap any out with inferior product, so we will seal the box that they're in. Fair enough, you think. They then went away promising to return and pay for the parcel. Having failed to keep their promise, their motive for taking so much trouble was doubted, and the box was opened. It contained only a few pieces of coal. When I told my husband this story, he went, "So, proto diamonds," which is a bad joke, but I thought I'd share it with you. The change of boxes by which this fraud was effected is supposed to have taken place previously to the sealing of that which contained the diamonds. A passport had been before obtained for the principal in the affair, that is for Simon Baum, who had lodged a few nights at the Huntley Coffee House, but who, according to the notice at the Alien Office, was to be found at number 6, Duke's Place, Houndsditch. Okay, so Houndsditch is in the East End, and at this point it was a pretty dicey area. It looks quite nice now. This is where number 6 Duke's Place would have been. It's clearly been gentrified, but at the time the East End was where you would want to go in there at night on your own. So what we have is a jewel heist. Fantastic. So what's interesting is that this kind of robbery, where someone pretends to be rich, actually had a whole cadre of thieves. And they were called spruce prigs. Prigs are thieves, people who prig your wallet, would steal your wallet. And spruce meant that they could pretend to be gentry, that they understood, manners, etiquette. They spoke well, they moved well, because a man had to move well like he had been taught to dance. And so there was this whole kind of group of criminals in London at the time called spruce prigs, and they often worked for like organized groups they would fund their clothes and all that kind of stuff, and they would infiltrate places where people had money. So they were often pickpockets. Quite a few of them worked the Bath springs, the bathhouse where you went to drink the waters. And I'm actually fascinated by these people, because they're people who can infiltrate but can't belong. And that's a really interesting position to be in, I think. Why do I know about these? I know about them because of this book. This is where I have learnt everything I know about thieves' cant. It's a very funny book. It has all these stories about escapades of thieves. My favorite spruce prig story is that this group of young spruce prigs made sure they encountered a group of young rich men, probably at a coffee house, and they challenged them to a bell ringing contest. Not something that would spring immediately to mind as a source of crime. So they challenged these guys. They went to a local church, and the bell ringing chamber is up in the spire. And so the spruce prigs said to the rich guys, "Okay, you go off and you go first." And so the guys took off their jackets and their vests and left their snuff boxes and everything in the chamber below, climbed the ladders, started ringing the bells, and the spruce prigs just gathered everything up and walked out. So there's quite a lot of stories like that in the book, as well as the dictionaries of thieves' cant and of the common, or what was called the vulgar tongue. So if you're interested in that kind of language stuff, I strongly recommend it. And it includes the dictionaries from which Georgette Heyer got her thieves' cant. So what happened to Rundell and Bridges? Well, they traded until the 1840s. They changed their name when Phillip Rundell retired, back to Messrs. Rundell, Bridge and Co. And Company, and they went on for, this was in 1831. They went on for another 12 years, and then the partnership dissolved. I imagine with the retirement of the younger Rundell and Bridges. But they were responsible for creating some of the most beautiful silver and gold work and jewel. They made the Irish crown jewels, for example. Some of the most beautiful of the period, and certainly were responsible for a great deal of Prynne's debt. So that's this week in the Regency. I'm Elizabeth Layton. I'll see you next week in the Regency.